All right, hello everybody. Welcome to the first episode of the Comic Book Syndicate's new podcast, Slam, which is dedicated to DC superheroes throughout the ages. I am your co-host, Mike L. And I'm really awkward at introducing other co-hosts, so I'll just say that I'm also joined by Joshua Mervell.
How's it going, everybody?
And Bex Luthor.
I thought you were going to just say, and there's other people here.
And all the rest.
And the three.
And also, for our initial episode here, we are joined by frequent Spidercast guest, Adam Pelche.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. This is great. It's funny because when I've told other people about this podcast, they didn't seem too excited, but you were definitely on board from the sounds of it, so that's good.
When I saw Dr. Occult, I just had to go for it. I'll explain that a little bit later, but yes.
Interesting. Okay. So let's just, we like to not talk too much before we record, so everything's very spontaneous. But first I want to know, let's start with our co-hosts. Josh, had you ever heard of Dr. Occult before the announcement of this episode?
Only a little bit, in passing. I don't think I knew too much about him. I don't even think I really knew about his, amulet thing or his powers, but I knew he was some sort of magic guy in the DC universe.
Okay.
That was, everything I knew about him.
Okay, and what about you, Bex Luthor?
Same thing, but mostly actually from Books of Magic, so. Mm-hmm. And the Trenchcoat Brigade is
Okay.
So, the more modern reinterpretation of the character, not any of the older stuff.
Cool. Okay, so now for the main event, Adam, it sounds like you have an interesting story about what you know about Dr. Occult.
Not really, but...
Okay.
Oh, cool.
You don't want to build it up too much.
What a great guest, I know. Really just echoing what Beck said. My exposure was through the Books of Magic.
Okay.
And at the time when I initially read it, being such a huge fan as I am of Gaiman's work, especially of that time period, I had no idea that Dr. Occult was actually, a character with a pre-existing history. I thought he was originally created for that series, so I was very intrigued to find out about his history and find out what sort of lineage he has in the DC universe, and he's very surprisingly seminal and deep history at that.
Right. So which leads us to why we are covering Dr. Occult. Most people think of Superman as DC's first superhero, and I mean, since he is the first superhero, he is arguably the first DC superhero, but Dr. Occult is the first character to exist in what is now called the DC universe, right? There were, for the record, we're not going to go into a huge history lesson about DC, but one of DC Comics' claim to fame is that they published the first original comic book in the world. Before, I think it was called New Comics #1. Before New Comics #1, all comic books were reprints of Sunday Funnies. And they were the first ones to basically go, why don't we just publish a book of new stuff? And so that basically invented kind of a new medium. It was already a medium, but they invented a new way to present the medium. So anyway, a few years go by, and Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster had already created Superman in 1935, and they had pitched him to many different publishers, but he was rejected, over and over again. It's kind of a famous story. But before Superman finally made it to print in 1938, they did manage to create a few other characters, some of which we'll get to on this podcast. But the first one that was published was none other than Dr. Occult. And so, just so everyone knows, to give it a rundown of the character, which we're going to find out when we review these issues here. The first one we're going to be talking about... Oh, I should mention, on this podcast, we kind of cover heroes throughout the decades. So, if you want to call it Golden Age, Silver Age, and then maybe... some people call it the Copper Age or whatever, the Dark Age, or whatever you want to call it, up until the Modern Age, right? There's different names. But we're going to start this week talking about New Fun Comics #6. But before we get to that, I'm just going to quickly give you a couple facts about the character. I've already mentioned he was created by Siegel and Shuster. Dr. Occult originally did not have any superpowers. He has an analytic mind and is a very proficient detective. He invented a crime detection device which keyed in on psychic vibrations, thus developing artificial clairvoyance. So again, still keeping it kind of down to earth. Now, over the course of his career, he battled vampires, ghosts, zombies, mystical cults, and various criminal scientists who used methods that were apparently supernatural. So over time, he did develop powers such as astral projection, intangibility, telekinesis, hypnosis, illusion casting, size alteration. However, later stories did try to explain these all as being illusions, because I think, like most DC characters at the time, he got more and more powerful as he went along. He also eventually got kind of a superhero costume with like a red cape and like a logo on his chest. However, he did disappear after, I think it was New Fun number 32 or something, and didn't appear anywhere until the All-Star Squadron comic that we're going to review later. So that's kind of interesting. But thankfully, rascally Roy Thomas was a big Golden Age fan, and he was the one that brought him back in All-Star Squadron, which we'll get to in a minute. But first, let's talk about his first appearance here in New Fun Comics number 6. Let me tell you, this podcast is Slam, and it's named after Slam Bradley, but I was so tempted to call this podcast New Fun, but I just didn't think it'd go over with like modern listeners. So anyway, so in this first Dr. Occult story, we can see it's called Dr. Occult, the Ghost Detective. I should warn you, this is only 1 page long. The whole comic is probably, I don't know, 64 pages, but for some reason, some of the stories were a little bit longer, but this one's only a page long. So it opens up in the middle of an adventure where Dr. Occult is basically walking down the street, and he passes by an alley and he sees a cry for help. He hears a cry for help, and the opening shot is him seeing a vampire. A vampire is kind of running away, and he's standing there saying, "A vampire!" So he's basically just rescued a guy. We see a guy laying on the ground, and the guy's like, "Thank you, what was it?" And he's like, "Never mind," but it's a vampire. And we see in the background, the shadow of the vampire is almost like, like kind of coming at Dr. Occult, but nothing ends up coming into that. So it's kind of out of the way now. Then the narration talks about how the victim comes home, and then we see the victim's wife or girlfriend say, "Sander, you're pale. What happened?" "Nothing, dear." And then it cuts to the next panel. But that night, and we see like these kind of, what are those kind of windows called? Like whatever they're called. Like these windows are kind of open, almost like inviting someone to come in. And we see like this vampire kind of leering into the window. And the next panel, we find out that Dr. Occult has actually substituted the guy's wife with his own partner, and her name is
Rose Psychic.
Rose Psychic, yes. So Rose Psychic gets bit by the vampire. Oh, is it Rose Psychic at this point, or is it not?
Yeah, it is.
You do.
No,
you find that out actually in the next issue / page.
Right. Yes, you're right. So technically, we don't know it's her. Yes, but what happens is she gets bit on her neck, and Dr. Occult is like, "It's as I fear. The 2 pinpricks on her throat are the marks of a vampire." And then it cuts to the next panel, and it says, "After first placing Mrs. Amster under strict guard in a private sanitarium, Dr. Occult substitutes his lovely assistant, Rose Psychic, in her bed. That evening, his trap said he waits tensely in a closet." So I think that the first woman was the girlfriend. I think. And then later, in the 2 panels later, now it's Rose Psychic. So Rose Psychic is in the bed, and then we see Dr. Occult standing there, and she looks over, and the vampire is coming through the window, and she's like, "Occult, help!" But then Dr. Occult swoops in and holds up his amulet, and it says, "Dr. Occult's magic symbol has no effect upon the vampire. Rose and he are at its mercy." And that is the end of the story. And while I did send the other 3 chapters to you guys, we're just going to talk about this one. So let's first ask our guest here, what did you think of the first ever story featuring Dr. Occult?
Sucked.
No, Adam.
It kind of sucked, but it was kind of awesome at the same time.
Right.
I mean, nothing is explained. You have a vampire that shows up apropos of nothing. He attacks this person, And randomly, said Sam Spade-style detective steps in, oh, it's a vampire, I'll protect your wife. And he happens to have an associate named Rose Psychic. No explanation about who these people are, what this magic amulet which he carries is. It just ends. And by all conventional storytelling ideas and conventions, it's horrible, but it's glorious at the same time. It doesn't care. It is corny. It is playing up the tropes of pulp and of gothic horror. You know what? For just a sheer trashy product of its time, I kind of love it.
Right. I'm with you on that. Before I say anything else, I should point out that as far as I know, Siegel and Shuster were maybe 18 when they did this.
It looks like it.
Yeah, it might have been intended for a weekly comic strip. So if you think about, opening up the Sunday Funnies, and this would have been just one page, that's probably what they might have had in mind when they created it. So I can understand them just jumping into the story. So I can excuse some of those things. But Becca, it sounds like you had a lot to say about the story. What do you think?
I did. I was just being funny. I'm sorry. Don't go to me.
Okay.
I'm not ready.
Oh, don't go to you? Okay. Josh,
no, it's fine.
This is a professional podcast, listeners. This is the first of many episodes. Please stay tuned.
I was making a joke.
Okay,
Jeez.
Bex Luthor.
No jokes allowed. Sorry.
This is no joking podcast.
I was so confused about. I mean, they say all white guys look the same, but Jesus, I was like, which one's the husband and which one's Dr. Occult? And it's like the husband a vampire, and then I didn't know what was going on, and it was a page, and it made me feel stupid. I was like, and then no, I didn't like it. Thought it was dumb.
You thought it was dumb. Okay, Joshua Mervell, what do you think?
It's a start to something. It definitely feels less like a comic book, and more of like maybe like a step along the way of like pitching something, maybe, or like almost like a storyboard where they're kind of just putting ideas down, and not really like a clear story. Like the panels don't really like lead one into the other like it's the next shot. It's almost like it's a new scene happening in every single panel. So yeah, it goes really fast, and a lot of the story is kind of described as what's going on rather than like seeing it in the images or hearing it through the dialogue. But it's interesting. I don't know. It's hard to say that whether I liked it or didn't like it, because it's almost like there's not a lot of substance to like put like a stamp one way or the other for me.
The thing is I mean, I've actually read quite a few Siegel and Shuster Superman comics. So I've really grown to like Siegel's or Joe Shuster's art style. As far as the writing, obviously, I mean, other than maybe Will Eisner at this time, this is the way comics were all done. Like the way that they just jump, it's almost like every panel is a new scene, let alone a new, whatever. It's like new scene, new location, new scene, no location. So you kind of just have to go with it, right? As far as the way that the drama is played out, I mean, it might have been better to see like a guy walking down an alley, a guy gets attacked by a vampire, Dr. Occult comes in, but instead we come in at the end of the scene. So it's not very dramatic, right? Like, but other than that, I feel like there's a germ of a good idea here. The fact that Dr. Occult is like a Sam Spade type detective, but he also happens to have this amulet himself, and her name's Rose Psychic, so I'm assuming she's psychic. So it's almost like X-Files, but if Mulder and Scully had powers themselves, right? So I think it's a great idea, and I must say that just based on this initial story, it really makes me curious about, hey, what's going on with Dr. Occult in 2023? And I know that he's been around, like he's been brought back, but I was surprised how many comics he's been in. Not like thousands, but there's a good handful of comics you can read with Dr. Occult, and I'm very tempted to read them now, just because this is such a cool idea, I think, So there's not much to say about the story. I did send you guys the other 4 chapters. They're kind of, along the same lines. There's nothing innovative here. There's nothing, it's kind of like Adam was saying, it's the pulp traditions of the day. There's really nothing great that you're going to find here. Unfortunately, Dr. Occult only lasted a few years. He never had his own comic. He never had his own cover feature, as far as I know. He was never in the Justice Society or the Seven Soldiers. So he disappeared and didn't show up again until All-Star Squadron number 49.
Before we moved on, Adam, did you have something you wanted to
I just wanted to touch upon one other thing, because beyond really the creation of the first mainstay of the DC universe, he was also the first of a new trope that was generated of the trench-coated paranormal investigator, which we are going to see later on in this podcast, but also outside of DC, this has kind of become its own trope or its own cliche. You can even look at the Jim Butcher novels as also someone who's investigating or engaging with paranormal activity, who is kind of this gruff, gritty detective wearing a trench coat. So what I wonder, is this the first instance of this sort of trope being played? Because I think it very well may be. And if so, there is some significance to this character, even if the execution is lacking due to the conventions of the time. There could be something to be said about how innovative a character like this being created was, if indeed he was the first instance of this sort of paranormal detective.
That's interesting, because it also reminds me of, did you ever see the Kolchak papers, the Night Stalker?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's also a similar idea, where I believe he worked for a newspaper, right? And then he would investigate vampires, werewolves, and stuff like that. And it's one of the main inspirations for X-Files. Unfortunately, I was not a fan of the lead actor. A lot of people are, but you can get the series on DVD now. So if anyone's interested in that, you can check it out. But it's a very cool idea, and again, it's a simple concept. He's like a private investigator, but he investigates the paranormal. It's just, it really makes me think that the DC could do more with him. And I know that they have brought him back in various, forms, but I'd like to definitely dig deeper and find out what else he's been in. With that, though, we're going to jump to All-Star Squadron. Now, before we get into All-Star Squadron, I want to know, Bex Luthor.
Yeah, what's up?
Have you ever heard of All-Star Squadron before today? Or before this week?
Sometimes, you're just trolling the dollar bins or the $half bins, and you see them, but that's kind of it. Okay. Josh, do you know anything about All-Star Squadron?
Yeah, pretty much the same. I've definitely heard the name, but I don't think I've read a single All-Star comic, and even some of these characters I'm really not familiar with. There's a few that I know, but
okay. I'll explain it all in a minute, but Adam, have you heard of the All-Star Squadron?
Pretty much in the same boat as everyone else. I'm familiar with Dr. Fate, I'm familiar with Shining Knight, but beyond like a few characters here and there, I knew nothing of this series or the characters themselves. Maybe some associations with the title, but I couldn't tell you what it was about.
So, Roy Thomas, he is Stan Lee's successor at Marvel, right? He was one of the first guys that Stan Lee hired to help him write. In the early days, Stan Lee did have other people helping him write, but he didn't like any of them, including his own brother. He didn't even like his own brother. But he hired Roy Thomas because Roy Thomas was able to kind of imitate Stan Lee's style. And so over time, Stan Lee would leave these titles and hand them over to Roy Thomas. So he left X-Men, gave it to Roy Thomas. He left Avengers, gave it to Roy Thomas. He left Spider-Man, gave it to Roy Thomas, fired Roy Thomas, came back to Spider-Man, left Spider-Man, gave it to Jerry Conway, and the rest is history. So Roy Thomas probably created more superheroes for Marvel after Stan Lee. Like, if you look at like the number, like Roy Thomas helped create every superhero from the 70s you can think of. Like,
wow.
He co-created, I don't want to go through them all, but if you go through the list, it's almost all Roy Thomas. So anyway, a very important creator for Marvel. He also did have a long career at DC. And one of the things about him is he was one of the first fans turned pro. And so he was obsessed with the Golden Age, right? And so a lot of these characters that everyone had forgot about, he was the guy that brought them back. And what he did with All-Star Squadron was he create... Oh, by the way, Roy Thomas invented the word retcon. Retroactive continuity, retcon, he invented it. And so...
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this is his historical fact. It's pretty interesting. So what he did with All-Star Squadron was he went back to the time of the Justice Society, and he retconned a new team called the All-Star Squadron that featured everyone from the Justice Society, as well as everyone from the Seven Soldiers of Victory, as well as virtually every DC superhero published at that time. So he would take stories that existed back in the 1940s, and then he would redo them, and then throughout the story he would add new parts with like other characters, and then as well he would write just completely new stories, right, featuring all these cool characters like Automan and Firebrand and the Doll or whoever. Oh, he also brought in characters from other companies that DC had bought that obviously never interacted with DC characters. So it was a really fun book to read. It was also set during World War II, which is always cool, right? And it featured some art by Jerry Ordway before he did Superman. And Jerry Ordway is one of my favorite artists. It featured art by other people like Arvell Jones, who we've met because he's from the Michigan area. People like that. So if you're into that kind of thing, it's a very cool comic. Now, I grew up loving this comic. Unfortunately, Roy Thomas has a huge weakness with his writing, and that's his writing. So, yeah,
Brutal.
I'm not gonna say any more about it until we get to the summary here. But, whew, it's a lot to get through. There's a lot happening in these Roy Thomas comics. But who was it that was gonna summarize this issue? Was it you, Becca?
Oh, the thing that's important to you and means a lot and stuff like that? Yeah, it was going to be me.
Perfect. Okay. Bex Luthor.
Before we start, is Roy Thomas still alive?
Yes.
I'm not going to tell you. Okay.
All right.
We've never met him, though, so it's okay. He doesn't know who we are.
So a lot of people who don't know who we are then find our content on the internet where we're
never
talking
had
about how much they
artist
suck.
comment on our videos after talking about their stuff on the podcast or
Yeah.
anything.
So, just check it. Because Dead Man can't critique my critiques of them. Okay, so this one's a lot. Some people say that, some of those older comics, they're really wordy and they're hard to get through. And this is one of them, for surezies. So we start off, and it looks like we're in the middle of a battle of some sorts, where the All-Star Squadron has been defeated by this green guy. What's his name? Shit.
Wotan?
Yeah.
Wotan. Right. Sorry, I forgot. I was looking in the Wikipedia and it said antagonists Wotan and Hitler. I forgot there was just the two.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. So Wotan is defeating the squadron, and Dr. Fate is like the only one left, and he has what does he do? He mind controls Shining Knight into thinking that he's King Arthur and is telling him that he needs to kill Dr. Fate. And then, so now they're all captured, and Shining Knight is working for Wotan, and they're...
This is not Wu-Tang Clan, it's Wotan. Okay?
Whatever. The green guy.
Oh, man.
Look, I'm sorry. I literally just read this. I thought I was gonna be more prepared, but then...
I can take over if you'd like.
I'm just scrolling and I'm looking at the panels and I'm like...
And you're reading it for the first time.
Honestly...
No, and I'm saying, oh right, nothing's happening. There's just a lot of words.
Yeah,
That's true.
There's a lot of pages of people talking and nothing happening in this one.
So they're all
honestly,
captured, and then Dr. Occult shows up.
Yeah, that's pretty
But
much
then-
it. Everything
but then
He's
there's-
also been captured.
But then there's a lot more that happens. We'll get to detail about that. But then after that scene, I'm like, oh, more Dr. Occult. No.
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 He doesn't
Hitler.
show up.
No.
Yeah, it's just talking.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they give him a little bit of a backstory about who Dr. Occult is, because, like Mike said, he probably had no idea, if you were reading this for the first time, who he was. He's just a guy with a pog.
That's right.
I think it's called
Magic
a
pod.
slammer. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely the slammer. And then we learned that Wotan is working for Hitler
That's right.
to recreate Camelot.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's what's
That's
happening?
it. It's exactly it.
That is the most bizarre of all Hitler plots I've heard so far
Yeah.
from comic books. And that includes the weird Hitler twins from the Batman Superman future storyline. Anyway.
And so it turns out that obviously this green guy's just using Hitler to get what he wants, which is, I don't recall. Is it just Camelot power?
Yeah, he's trying to leverage the war to take over Britain so he can bulldoze all of England and restore it back to Camelot times. So he needs to work with Hitler, of course, to lure Winston Churchill out so he can destroy the British Navy and Army.
Right.
I also
that's
feel
right.
like they took a bunch of acid before reading this comic because
Yeah, it's a tough one.
I forgot Winston Churchill's also in there.
Yeah,
And
he's here.
then, what else happened?
It really is the Smash Ultimate of comic books. Everybody's in this one.
And then and then they're robots, right? All of the knights.
Yeah, all the knights are robots.
the
Sure.
robot knights. Because why not? And they're killing the British soldiers. And then for some strange reason, Winston Churchill's like, no, we can't go and help our people because it's a trap. So let's just wait it out and see if we can get another. What did he say? Another.
He's pretty much like we've only got one hope. We kind of just need to hope for a miracle.
Yeah, he wants another Dunkirk. He thinks God helped them at Dunkirk, so they'll help them here as well.
Right.
That's what he's hoping for. And then, our man shows up.
Yep. Who?
Right.
I guess we thought died. We didn't really see that in this one.
Yeah,
I
at
guess.
the very beginning, there's like a mention of a plane crash, and he's mentioned to have been in there, and the bad green guy is like, now that he's dead, now I can get you guys. Now that the greatest superhero of all time, Our Man, has been defeated, the rest of you, whatever, Robot Man and Dr. Fate and the Fire Girl. So Our Man's back. However, his hourglass during the kerfuffle got flipped, and he doesn't know if he's got a minute left of power or an hour left of power, which seems like a huge flaw
Yeah.
Yeah.
in it. But I guess there's no digital watches yet, so unfortunately he's got to go. No, it's the 80s. There were. So
Well, no,
yeah,
it's,
so he's.
it's the 40s, actually.
Oh, this is the 40s.
Yeah, this is the 40s. That's why Hitler's there.
Right. Sorry.
yeah.
Get my times mixed up. Camelot, King Arthur, Hitler. But yeah, so he doesn't know, and it's funny because like they show like how much power he's got left with his time, and there's just like timer that has question marks. And so Our
What
Man
a
is
shitty power.
trying to get
So
through
bad.
to Shining
Oh my
Knight.
god.
And so he waves the British flag to remind him of who he is. Mm-hmm. And he's like, that flag, it means something to me. I'm not one of the Knights of the Round Table.
Please, in a
I'm
British
Justin.
accent. Bex, please.
Sorry?
Please, in a British accent, actually, please.
Me? You don't want that. That's just offensive. And so he finally breaks out of his hypnosis and comes to and does the thing that nobody else could do and just punches this green guy in the face. And then Dr. Occult's back and he's like, see, I helped. And then they're still fighting some of the robots, and then Our Man runs out of Our Man power. And then just zonks out, and then Dr. Fate flies him to the hospital.
And
He explains how his powers work, and I still don't understand how his powers work.
Our
He
Man?
only
Yeah. So
He
he
only has an hour
Parker's
worth
even
of
annoyed.
power.
He
And in
takes a
order
mir-
to...
Okay.
Well, he takes a miracle pill. Yeah.
It's drug
great.
based.
Yeah. Come on.
Okay,
And
he
then
says,
he-
usually I use my hourglass to tell how much power time I've got left, but it fell over when I did. Okay, so the hourglass is not what gives him the power. It just tells
No.
him how long he has left of his power.
It's just setting the beeper on the stove. That's all it is. Yeah.
Because he can't remember when he took the pill last. Was it a second ago or was it 59 minutes ago?
Gotcha.
You know, sometimes time just goes by so fast when you're fighting Hitler.
Got you.
You know, I love the naivety of these golden age heroes sometimes.
Right.
Let's just take drugs to make us really strong, and that's how I'm going to fight crime.
Right. And to be fair, that's part of the charm of Golden Age heroes is their powers are so sometimes unimaginative or illogical or, you know, like just like the original Adam, his superpower was that he had a good left hook. You know, like that was it. So things obviously got better in the 50s and 60s, but there is a charm to these characters, and I think that's the appeal of All-Star Squadron, because the writing's not good, the art's not good, but it's cool to see these ridiculous superheroes fighting, you know, Hitler, literally Hitler, and teaming up and doing this stuff, but it's just so hard to read. So
Every person on this team is incompetent.
that's true. But that
Except
also,
for Justin.
That's because you know Roy Thomas wrote them to be incompetent. Like, what can I say? I don't know. I grew up liking All Star Squadron, but last year I tried to reread them and I couldn't do it. They're just so badly written. Adam, what did you think of the writing in All Star Squadron?
Yeah, it was atrocious. And it wasn't even just that the prose was bad. It was just exposition block after exposition block. And it's a shame because in terms of the concept, I kind of dig it. Because I liked when we had that period in the 1980s where we had people like Morrison or Alan Moore taking more obscure Golden Age or Silver Age characters, reworking them, and making these really incredible narratives with them. And so because of what I saw on the cover, I was thinking, oh, this might be something similar, but it shares none of the prose or creativity that a Morrison or a Moore has. It's, you know, it's funny to talk about a comic book featuring Winston Churchill and a green-skinned wizard and Hitler, but is it worth the laugh for reading it? I was not laughing by the time I was done. I was crying a little bit, but
Yeah.
you know. Although I do have to say, for the particular issues, the scans that we read, I did appreciate the vintage 1980s advertisements.
Oh yes.
Oh, yeah.
Sadly, that's the highlight of the comic, right?
I really want some Hostess fruit pies right now. So
Find your way to the Newtons. Yes.
The Fig Newton
Fig
maze.
Newtons. Yep.
There's a little alligator, and like if you look, if I'll take you to the Fig Newton maze on page whatever number it is. Right above the word discover, there's a little gremlin,
Yep, I
gremlin
see
dog,
him.
and that's my favorite part of this comic. If I could stomach getting a tattoo, I would get that little one-tooth little guy.
So Josh, tell
I
us.
also see this advertisement for this alien who really loves Reese's Pieces, which
Yes.
feels kind of like a ripoff, maybe
BT?
of some. Yeah,
I know.
it's
Well,
strange. Maybe they couldn't get him for the advertisement or something.
It was a
but
strange time.
they had to
but,
hire some other guy.
you're talking about Mac from Mac and Me, right?
Oh boy, if it was Mac and from Mac and Me, I would. That's the only thing I'd be talking about.
My favorite part of this alien is that you know that the artist did not draw an upper torso on him.
Mm-hmm.
So like you could be anything behind those Reese's Pieces.
My favorite part is that he's got a perfectly shaped hole for all of his Reese's Pieces to go into right on the top of his head.
That's
Gross. That's where I assume it goes.
We don't
Where
know
else
his
would you put
anatomy,
it?
so yeah.
True. He's also got 2 right eyes. Anyways,
Yeah, back to the
yeah,
Squadron.
let's talk about
It's
this.
easier to draw the other eye when you just flip it.
Okay, so yeah, this was the story sucks because like it could be really fun and campy and goofy, but I think they spend too much time focusing on things that don't matter in the story to kind of establish what's going on. We spend so much time with them being captured and just sitting around waiting to hear what the plan is, and we have like pages of him talking to Hitler and not revealing what his plan is, and then afterwards he's like, oh yeah, my plan, by the way, was to take over and bring Camelot back. It's like, you wasted all this time on like nonsense, right, when you could have been like giving us more camp of like him, like what he plans to do when he takes over, or like how Dr. Occult got there, even like why is this character in the story? Like he doesn't matter at all. It's so strange that he's here. Like he has zero reason to be here. He doesn't do anything to save the day at the end. He doesn't give them any vital information for the main heroes to save the day. He wasn't vital for the bad guys' plan either. He didn't need anything from Dr. Occult to bring back Camelot. Like there was nothing. Maybe he could use the tracker to track down an ancient dragon that's been sleeping for years so he could bring it back to Camelot or something. But he's just kind of here for like a weird throwback and reference. And that's about it. So especially because we're reading this for Dr. Occult, this one really blows.
Yeah, so that's the thing. You bring back Dr. Occult after 40 years, and what do you do with him? You have him locked up, he talks for 5 seconds, revealing his origin, and then you don't do anything with him. Like, it's just... okay, this is my assessment of I'm sorry, but of Roy Thomas and this comic. It feels like an amateur fan fiction, like, oh... I get to take all of my favorite superheroes and put them together into one story, but it's garbage. Like, this is not something a professional writer would do. It's something a fan would do. Like, I have the opportunity to bring back Dr. Occult. What am I going to do with him? Oh, nothing. And then the rest of the story goes on, and it's just like every step of the way, everything he could do wrong, he does wrong, it feels like, you know?
It's especially so strange because you would think that if he wanted to write the story to bring back the character, or even the fact that he brought him back at all, he would want to like do something interesting to like bring him into the story and have him like be a cool character in it instead of just some guy in jail. Like, oh yeah, I've been locked up here for a little while too.
Yep.
Anyways, back to your, regular story.
Like what it should have been is, we can't defeat the villain, but I know someone who can. Remember, like when Captain America recruited Falcon, I know someone who can help us, and they go and find Dr. Occult. Maybe he's been retired or something, and he can help them defeat the villain. No, that doesn't happen. It's just, it's bad. And okay, now let's talk about the art. The art's terrible. It's not like, I mean, other than my like nostalgic feeling for the 80s, it's really terrible art, right? There's like almost nothing good about it.
It's fine. I don't know. I don't think it's terrible, but it's
serviceable.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think, Adam? Do you like the art?
It's middling. Like, I can't really criticize it too much, but I can't really applaud anything about it either. It's just like middle of the road. I can't really say too much about it, which, goes on to the rest of the criticisms. It's boring, like everything else about it. It's just dull.
Yep.
It's beige. Way too beige.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. Becca, what do you think of the art?
Hitler looks like Hitler. I knew it was Hitler right away without having to read it. And that's not good if that's the best thing that's drawn in your comic is Hitler. Also, why is everything drawn with like a Dutch angle? Like, did anyone else notice that? I kept going like, are the panels tilted? Like, did the scan upload get messed up? Everything's tilted.
That's actually not always a bad thing, but
it's too much.
Yeah. Well,
it works for dramatic scenes, but it's happening in scenes where characters are just pontificating. It's like excitement, people talking. It doesn't really correlate to good storytelling.
Right. Right. There's really no, and that's again getting back to being kind of like amateur. The artist is not making the right choices of when to use Dutch angles or when to use close-ups. It's just almost. I mean, I'm looking through it. There's some panels that are decent, but for the most part, it's very uneven and just sloppy. I find, So
Yeah. He does draw a decent horse, and horses are hard to draw.
So
that's all I have. I like the horsey.
Now, obviously, the reason we read this issue was because Dr. Occult appears in it. Let's just briefly talk about this cameo. We already talked about how pointless it is, but I mean, we learn about his costume. We see the amulet. I mean, that's it. I mean, he's really there just to explain his origin. There's not really much to say about it.
I was gonna say I feel like there's nothing to say. He's very misused in the issue. The poor guy. He hasn't been around for 50 years, and they bring him back to throw him in jail.
Now, I did point out that the story we read from New Fun Comics did go on for 3 more chapters, as well as there's a bunch of other stories with Dr. Occult. Dr. Occult does appear a few more times in All-Star Squadron. So my question is, Adam Peltier, are you going to read those issues of All-Star Squadron?
Oh, hell no.
No compulsion, eh?
No. I'll say this, just talking about his appearance in here. We were given a plethora of backstory and information about what he did, but I have no idea who his character is.
Yes.
There has not been any characterization for him, and I get from the era, the golden era of comics, that wasn't always something focused upon. It was very plot-driven. But now we're in the sphere where even in mainstream comics, we have extremely character-driven storylines. And the fact that you bring this character back, and I don't know anything about who they are, all you tell me is all these things he did. Is he arrogant? Is he humble? Does he exude any sort of confidence? Is he meek? Like, I have nothing to go on. I have no interest in pursuing this character at this point, at least from what I've read.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. Because sometimes, you'll see like Darwin Cook do some weird character and you're like, oh, I want to know more about them. And then you'll read the original version and it's crap. But this doesn't even do that. This doesn't even make you want to read the original version, right? It's not enticing at all. The other thing I gotta say about this is, for all of our criticisms about New Fun Comics number 6, I think that flowed better than this does, because at least you can get through the page, even though there's even though there's a little bit too much narration and things are overexplained and it's not really visually told well. At least it flows. And like, the thing I was surprised about reading Jerry Siegel's writing is his dialogue is not terrible. I'd rather read Jerry Siegel dialogue than this dialogue. Josh, what do you think?
It's also streamlined. Like, everything that needs to be in that original one is there, because they don't have enough pages to, put in some extra junk. With this one, it's like just stuff kind of thrown in just to be thrown in. Like, if there were that limitations, I don't think Dr. Occult would even be in this one. There would be no room for him.
Like, for those, if you're listening to this and you've never read a Golden Age comic or even an 80s comic, there are better Golden Age comics by Will Eisner and Jack Cole and people like that. As far as 80s, we know that there's more great 80s comics, better comics than this. This is an example of the kind of comic that critics used to crap on in the 80s. Like, it's just typical bad art, bad story, bad everything. The only redeeming quality about this is the concept is cool, to team up all of DC's Golden Age characters into one story. That's a great idea. And there are some issues of All-Star drawn by Jerry Ordway, also Joe Kubert. So there's some issues worth digging up, but this is definitely not one of them.
No. Yeah, again, that's a fun idea to bring them all back together again. They seem to be doing it in a totally wrong way with Dr. Occult. Like, this would have been better as just like a reveal that it's him, and then like at the end or something, right? When they all escape, Like,
Right.
who is that guy in the shadow? It's me, Dr. Occult,
Yeah.
and then it leads into the next one or something. But this return doesn't seem so justified. Like, yeah, he doesn't get to do anything.
I agree. So I think it's safe to say I'm not going to be reading any more All-Star Squadron, but actually I will. Adam, are you going to read any more All-Star Squadron?
If you invite me back and I'm forced to, I guess I will. But
Okay. Otherwise. Bex Luthor?
Only if it's for the podcast so I can continue to crap on it. Me, your typical 80s critic.
There you go. Yep. And Josh, you reading any more All-Star Squadron?
No, definitely not.
Okay, so now we're going to jump to, again, a slight gap in publishing, only of about 5 years, but then in 1990 or so, DC decided they wanted to have someone kind of, I don't want to say organize, but kind of like codify, is that the word? They're sort of magic, and supernatural characters all together and kind of make some sense of them. And so originally, apparently, they wanted to hire J.M. DeMatteis to do it, but he passed, and so they hired an up-and-coming popular writer, Neil Gaiman, who went on to create, the most popular version of the Sandman, which we all know. Now, Swamp Thing is the comic that kind of got the ball rolling with what became Vertigo. But if you really look at Books of Magic, it was very, very important because, as we'll see, it introduced a whole bunch of characters that were kind of used throughout Vertigo's like 20, 25-year history. So anyway, Adam Pelche, you're going to tell us what happens in the first issue of Books of Magic #1.
Okay, so in the debut issue of Books of Magic, we open up on a dark scene with 4 trench-coated figures talking in secret about something. It appears it's about a young man, and they are implying that he has some special abilities or special fate. The young man is Timothy Hunter, and it's revealed eventually that these 4 figures in the shadows are none other than the self-professed, or at least by John Constantine, the Trenchcoat Brigade. So, in addition to Constantine, there's also...
It's actually Constantine.
You know what? I keep trying to pronounce it Constantine because I know it's not the Keanu Reeves pronunciation. Constantine. Right. Yeah. But it's John Constantine, the Phantom Stranger, Mr. E, and Dr. Occult. So as the comic goes on, it's essentially this series of vignettes where it shows Timothy skateboarding through this urban wasteland while the 4 figures continue discussing what they're going to do, and eventually they come upon an agreement that they are going to speak with Timothy. And so we have a series of pages illustrated and painted by John Bolton. I'll talk about the art in just a moment. Hopefully we'll have a discussion about that. But in their pursuit of Timothy, each one has a moment to have a little bit of characterization, speaking to Tim in a very distinct way, appearing to him in their various guises, and it ends with the 4 converging upon him, explaining that they need to show him something. They need to show him that he is capable of great magic. Essentially, even though Tim is very cynical and basically is making fun of all members of the group, they eventually do demonstrate some magic to him, which makes him believe. I believe, yes, it is by forming an owl out of his yo-yo. That's what makes him go, oh, maybe there's something to this. And eventually the comic ends with Tim being convinced to go along with one of the figures on this journey where he's going to learn more about himself and others. And really not getting too much more into the subsequent series, that's essentially what the rest of the Books of Magic are. In this debut issue, he's actually accompanied not by Dr. Occult, but by the Phantom Stranger, as he's taken around the present world looking at different instances of magical characters and figures within the DC universe. Not in any sort of, I would say, cheesy or corny way, but he's really portraying the sort of importance and the kind of the dark visceralness of magic that's affecting the present world, including references and appearances by various figures of the DC universe, past and present, while also taking a history lesson, going through various instances of magic throughout cultures in the world, and just exploring how that lineage has spread, including meeting a young Merlin. Eventually, the comic ends with Timothy finishing this journey with the Phantom Stranger and about to embark on the next destination, where he's traveling along with, I believe it actually at this point would be Mr. E for the next book. Oh, no, pardon me. In book 2, he's actually going to be with John Constantine. With that said, there are plenty of characters that he meets, plenty of references to other magical figures, such rich lore, it's actually difficult to go into in a brief summary, but just to keep it brief, this is kind of the invention of this young character going on his own to discover this potential power he has. Well, one of the figures, as he goes on to his next journey with Constantine, goes, "I still think we should kill him," indicating that there is this risk about him learning this knowledge. And the series goes on. I will just say, from my point, although this might be a bit of a spoiler, I do highly recommend it. This was my introduction to Dr. Occult, and the next book I read from Neil Gaiman after completing the Sandman series, and I was enthralled by it.
Nice. Yes, I've read it before. I read it a few years ago. I actually forgot each issue is done by a different artist. The first one is John Bolton. There's Charles Vess, Bo Hampton, and I can't remember the other one, but I should point out that book 3, like you said, Adam, is actually the one that features Dr. Occult. So we could have just skipped to chapter 3. Maybe we should have. But I read this one because it's the first part of the story. So we do see a little bit of Dr. Occult. Not as much as if it was a solo story, but certainly more than we saw in All-Star Squadron. But why don't we just start by talking about this issue itself. Joshua Mervell, what did you think of this comic on its own?
Oh, it was amazing. I feel like I had seen bits and parts of this online. It is a pretty famous short series. And when I finished this book, I couldn't stop. I read all 4.
Nice.
It's fantastic. It's so good. The art is amazing. I think that the story is so... for being about something that is so fantastical, it's so sincere and dark and grounded. The fact that they're not just bringing him on like a tour of all these mystical, magical places, but they're teaching him that everything kind of comes with a consequence, and the history behind this magic and how it's been around for since time itself, essentially. Like, we start off at the beginning of time when in all of creation and go from there to present day. It's fantastic. A lot of the times too, when you're reading about magic in the world, they don't really describe it to you. They kind of just go, it's magic, it's mystical, like these things happen. Where here it really felt like you understand what they're talking about, and the way that it's kind of described and the history behind it, it all feels very real. It's really, really good, and it definitely makes me want to continue reading stories like this. I know that the kid, I can't remember his name now.
Timothy.
Timothy. He gets his own series and is like a prominent character later on. So
right,
yeah.
Bex Luthor, what'd you think of this one?
Dude, I love books of magic. Oh my god. I totally, like, when you linked it, I was like, oh yeah. Because I read this, like, 2 decades ago?
Right.
And I haven't even really thought about it since. I have a couple issues of it, actually, so that's cool.
Nice.
But yeah, I'm kind of bummed we didn't read issue 3, because that's my favorite one. Because Charles Vess is a god among men. It's just beautiful. But this was also breathtaking. And it's so funny to go from the All-Star Squadron to this one.
Yeah.
Because I think Neil Gaiman is just a fantastic writer.
Yeah.
And he's a fantastic comic book writer. And sometimes going from books to comics doesn't translate. And he can do both very well. And I do enjoy that about him. I also follow him on Tumblr. Tumblr has two famous people are on Tumblr: Neil Gaiman and Will Wheaton, and that's it. And he is a joy, and you can ask him whatever question you want about anything he's ever written, and he will eventually answer you. So, like, you could just learn so much about his thought process and where he's just going on and on. Like, I would absolutely recommend Neil Gaiman's Tumblr. But, I think my favorite part of Books of Magic is that Timothy is just kind of there. He's like, he's just you, the reader, and he's your way of experiencing just the DC history of magic. And I just really enjoy the way that it flows and how beautiful the writing is and how it makes magic realistic in a sense of, like, it's not just fantastical, it's not just evil, it's just is. And you have these 4 trenchcoat warriors in their, like, very gritty, down to earth, and they'll be like, hey, so if you want to pursue this magic, you don't just get to be you anymore. It's not about you anymore. It's much bigger than you. God, I love Books of Magic. It's so cool.
I just want to go off of what Beck was saying, because it's more than just about magic. It's about interconnection of being a growing person, coming to awareness of yourself. Like, the book in itself is such a beautiful story of a young person learning to have consequences of their actions and deciding on choices that will impact their lives and their life, and the lives of people around them. Like, in terms of just being an analogy of what it is to be a young man suddenly being exposed to the fact that, yes, my actions have consequences and will affect other people, that's very powerful. But I do want to focus on what Beck said about magic being treated almost like an ecology where things are connected. And I really love that because it feels naturalized. It's not just, as Josh said, it's magic, it happens. It feels like it serves a purpose. Like, there's an underlying tether about this order of magic within the universe, which makes sense. It's so hard to do in fiction to make magical realms and fantastical things make sense, but it did a fantastic job. And I just want to mention one more thing about this particular series, because I regret we didn't read issue 3, because not only do we see Dr. Occult, but we do see the return of Rose, who is presented not so much as a separate figure, but almost an aspect of Dr. Occult, which makes this dynamic that the two had even more interesting. We're kind of getting the feminine and male attributes of a single character depicted here, showing another aspect of magic, duality. I thought that was done so well, and in spite of all the books that we have read or could potentially read, I felt much more characterization of Dr. Occult through that depiction than anything else that would have been presented through the Golden Age comics or what I would imagine was presented in All-Star Squadron.
Yes, well, and feel free to talk more about book 3 as much as you want, both Becca and Adam, because, you're right, we probably should have done book 3. But what I was going to say about this, as far as the depiction of magic, what I really liked was, if you contrast it with a movie like, say, Doctor Strange, the first one, my biggest problem with that movie was it treated magic as if it was kind of just like another science. Well, what I mean is, like, remember in Dr. Fate when he was just doing that little trick where he would, like, open a portal? I felt like everything was too basic and just so, like, if you press this button, this will happen. And I feel like I can't define how I think magic should be depicted, but this was much closer to it. I feel like it's almost like trying to master, almost like Mother Nature, or trying to tame a wild animal. Like, you don't just go in, like, press a button and you tame a wild animal. It takes time, and it takes an understanding of something that a human mind cannot fully ever understand. And that's what I feel like Neil Gaiman was doing with this issue. Magic is not something that you're just going to grasp in, like, 5 seconds. And we're probably not going to grasp it in reading the 4 issues, but I feel like Neil Gaiman gets it, so that he is able to kind of drop these little clues so that when we're reading it, it's like just when we think we get it, he kind of like knocks us down. It's like, no, you don't get it yet. It's this. And then we think we understand it again. He's like, no, it's this, right? And so we're learning a little bit more each time. And it's just so clever the way he does it. And it reminded me a little bit of Promethea by Alan Moore. And on one hand, this shares one weakness with Promethea, that it kind of ends up being like a little bit of a lesson, like a lecture about magic and not so much of a story. But I actually think Neil Gaiman does a better job in this story of dropping in more character moments. Like when he's talking to Merlin and then they leave and Merlin is left with his assistant or whoever it is. There's little moments like that where it's not just a lecture. There's still characters and there's still different points of view. Even the end of the chapter when he's like, I still think we should kill him. Like little moments like that are just brilliant. And I love the way Neil Gaiman, or Gaiman, I'm not even sure what's the right pronunciation.
I think it's Gaiman.
Gaiman? Okay.
Yeah. Ask him on Tumblr.
Okay, there you go. Ask him how to pronounce his name. I just love the way it's almost like you feel like you're getting a lecture, and it's almost like borderline pretentious and kind of a little bit of pontificating, but then he pokes a little hole in it and deflates it with a little bit of humor or a little bit of characterization of, say, John Constantine or whatever. And I just think that this is the second time I've read it, and I think it's actually better the second time around. So I'm definitely going to finish this series, and I'm very tempted to go on to read. I know there's an ongoing series, there's more mini-series, right? I think the character is still around, Timothy Hunter, as far as I know. So,
yeah, and another thing that I learned after reading all this, I was kind of looking up some other things about these characters, but there's also the ending. Are we okay to like spoil what happens at the end of the 4 books? Well. So Mr. E still believes that they should kill him, and he ends up getting left like thousands of years in the past. And there is a series called Mr. E where it's about him kind of returning to present day and kind of trying to finish what he started in this book. So I'm probably gonna try and track that down and read that to finish that part of the story, because I really, really enjoyed this.
And again, think about this. Came out in 1990. It was only 7 years after All-Star Squadron. Look how much comics had evolved in that short time, largely because of, Alan Moore, right? Like Alan Moore kind of beginning the British invasion of all these writers. And then I'm not sure who came next, if it was Neil Gaiman or Grant Morrison, but you have these writers from the UK coming over, and within only a couple years, then you have Vertigo. You have Peter Milligan, you have Jamie Delano, and it's like all of a sudden now you have this whole line of comics for older readers, right? And more literate readers, I guess you could say, no offense. But just night and day, and it makes me regret not reading more of these comics when they were out. But yeah, I loved this comic. I really enjoyed it. And again, the fact that you had 4 of the best artists working in that style at the time doing this book, like what a find. Wow. I might even have these somewhere, the original issues. I don't even know, or maybe I did, but anyway, I'm going to dig them out for sure.
One other thing to keep in mind too, Neil Gaiman actually released the first issue of Sandman, I think it was January of 1989. So he was doing that concurrently with this.
Wow. Right, yes. What a time to be alive, eh? Wow. Yeah, it was definitely...
I just assumed that Sandman would have been a spin-off of this, because he does appear in, I think, the 3rd issue, actually.
I think Death does too, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
No, yeah, this was definitely, or Sandman was definitely first. It was 89, I know that. It was like mid-1989, I think. But, I mean, there's another Neil Gaiman comic, Black Orchid, that I've never read from around this time that I can't wait to get my mitts on now, I'm just so excited, especially because the Sandman TV show's out. It's just bringing back all those memories. But, so yeah, I'm really glad that, with the format of the show, we were able to go from 1935 all the way to 1990. I mean, maybe in the future we can do a Dr. Occult Part 2 and follow up with what he's been up to since then,
Yeah, it'd be fun.
Overall, yeah, I'm definitely again, now the next time I walk into a comic store and I see Dr. Occult somewhere, I'm definitely going to want to pick it up to see what it, how things are going, and inevitably be disappointed. But whatever, it's fine.
Well, Mike, I have some bad news for you.
Uh-oh. Yeah. What's that?
He's dead.
He's dead.
Oh, shit. Okay. Okay, scrap that plan.
He was dead in New 52 continuity, so since Rebirth, no one knows really what's going on, so who knows? Maybe he's still kicking around.
Well, yes, he'll definitely be back, but don't you also think this would make a great character in like a movie or TV show? Mm-hmm. Definitely a TV show.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they'd probably like Jonah Hex him, so maybe they should.
Yeah. That'll be a future episode of Slam. But anyway,
God.
So yeah,
Speaking
of Slam, next week we are going to be reviewing the namesake of this podcast, Slam Bradley, and we are going to be going directly from, again, the Golden Age to the, I think, Bronze Age to the Modern Age. It's going to be a lot of fun, very similar to this week. I really want to thank Adam Pelche for not only joining us, but for showing so much enthusiasm for the format. And we'll definitely have you on again, possibly when we review Our Man. I don't want to make any promises.
But I'm just shaking with anticipation.
Modern Our Man is dope, though. Like the
robot?
The one that's a robot? Yeah.
Is a robot Our Man?
Whoa.
Yes.
Yeah, he's an android, and he actually controls time. And it makes sense that his name's Our Man.
Oh shit! Sign me up for that. Okay.
Yeah, sounds
He's
sick.
dope. He has the DNA of the original Our Man.
It's cool. It's Grant Morrison. He created the android Our Man.
You sold me just with that.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so there you go. And I want to thank Bex Luther for joining us.
Yeah.
All right.
I like talking about Tumblr.
And it's good that I'm impressed that you'd already read Books of Magic, so that's very cool. Your street cred just went up.
It was proto Harry Potter, so obviously.
There you go. That's
Because when I was into Harry Potter back in the day, I was like, why is everyone saying that J.K. Rowling stole her idea from this guy, Neil Gaiman? And I was like, okay, so I read this. I was like, oh, this is much better.
Yeah.
it's good stuff,
And then,
that's for sure.
20 years later, I was like, oh, at least this one's, not too offensive. Mm-hmm. Neil Gaiman, still a good person.
Yes,
so
he is.
winner,
Yes.
winner.
And then Josh, I want to thank you for joining us, and you can take it from here.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for listening to our podcast. As always, you can find us at thecomicbooksyndicate.com. If you're looking for our podcast on the go, you can also find them wherever you can find podcasts. So that's Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts. We're there. So leave us a review, comment on our YouTube videos, let us know what you guys think about the comics we're talking about or the podcast themselves. Let's keep that comics conversation going.
All right, we'll see you next time.